Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. I'm Ken Wong from the RGP of Toronto, representing the RGP team, along with Wendy Zay, who is here co-piloting this session. Wendy has just sent out a query that if anyone's having trouble hearing, to please type in the chat box or email Wendy at her email address listed in the chat box so we can provide some technical assistance. But moving on, and on that note, we do encourage you to participate in this discussion, which you can do so by typing in the bottom line of that chat box on the bottom right of your screen. Some of you may have signed on with your phone lines, and we ask that you do keep those phone lines muted, just so we don't have any interference coming from echoing or background noise that may distract the rest of the audience. With that, thank you very much for signing in. We're very excited to have this webinar, and one of the key topics we want to discuss is early and frequent mobilization being a very important part of senior-friendly care for vulnerable, hospitalized, older patients. It perhaps could also be said that the lack of mobilization is a hazard, as we know that it can result in functional decline that can compromise health, discharge, safety, and quality of life. In Ontario, we've been working for many years with the Move On strategy, the Mobilization of Vulnerable Elders in Ontario strategy to power early mobilization efforts. And this strategy is co-led by Dr. Barbara Liu, the Executive Director of our office here, along with Dr. Sharon Strauss and her team at St. Michael's Hospital. And at the end of the slide deck, you will see a link to the website for the Move Canada website for reports, resources, and things to help your team implement early mobilization. Today's webinar tells the story of End PJ Paralysis. This originated out of the UK, and we hope may turn into a global campaign to promote early mobilization. And thanks to the intergalactic interweb, we are able to invite Professor Brian Dolan to host this webinar, who is presenting today from his home base in New Zealand. So, a quick introduction. Brian Dolan is Director of Health Service 360, working with organizations undertaking leadership development, culture change improvements in patient flow, and whole systems reform. His clinical background is in emergency and mental health nursing. Brian's published over 70 papers and is author-editor of 6 books, mostly on emergency care. He's got a master's degree in nursing in educational research methods, is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, honorary professor of leadership in healthcare at the University of Salford, Manchester, and visiting professor of nursing at the Oxford Institute of Nursing, Midwifery, and Allied Health Research. So Brian is here to tell us about the End PJ Paralysis campaign, which he originated, as well as another initiative called the Last 1,000 Days, which reminds us to preserve and value patient time. So with that, I am going to flip the intergalactic remote control over to Professor Dolan for him to lead the rest of today's discussion.
Thank you, Ken, for that very warm and generous obituary. My name is Brian Dolan, and for the next 8 or 9 hours, we're just going to see how we go. I'm going to be we're going to be spending some time looking at the issue of PJ paralysis, End PJ paralysis in the last 1,000 days, but in particular, its context in relation to time. And it's great to see somebody on the call, including, I note, a good colleague of mine from the UK, Roberta Fuller, who will be in Edmonton on the 24th and 25th at MedWorks. So what I'm going to do is pop in the chat box. I'm putting Roberta's email address because she'd really love to connect up with good people while she's over there talking about patient flow and all of those sorts of things. So we're going to focus on a model that's been co-created by myself and Linda Holt called the Today model, and it contextualizes and is a model, a new model for change, if you wish. As Ken has very generously introduced to me, essentially I'm a director of pretentious job titles, as you can see there. And do feel free, please, if you will, to pop into the chat box, ask questions, make comments, send heckles. That's fine as well. But I'll start this thing with a question, which is this: if you had 1,000 days left to live, how many would you choose to spend in hospital? And if you will, pop the answer in the chat box if you wish. How many of your last 1,000 days would you choose to spend in hospital? And I think the multiple attendees are typing, and the answer is pretty universal. Yes, although I've got one that says one, but just for the cafeteria. Right. I'm kind of hoping that you don't have a Mackie D's where you said. So thank you for that. And that pretty much universally is the answer that people will give, because it's around actually making recognizance that in the final analysis we would choose to spend our time with our loved ones, and as kind and compassionate as we are in healthcare, actually for most of us we would want to be with those we love the most. And over the Christmas period, Linda Holt and I, she's my business partner, we worked together for many years now, known each other for most of that. As I told her that we could, in Stratford-upon-Avon. So I spent about 6 months of the year in New Zealand as Director of Service Improvement. I spent 2 or 3 months in Australia, and also then the rest of the time in the UK and sometimes in Ireland as well, where I'm originated from. Just for the record, I tell you what, we'll take Justin Bieber off you if we can give you the Bono from our place, if that's all right with you. But the Today model was conceived at a coffee shop in Stratford-on-Avon, and as it indicates, it's around these elements, and we're going to walk through them at a fair old brisk pace. And it comes from a book, or a booklet, more accurately, workbook we've co-created that came out in March of this year, called The Last 1,000 Days, and it helps frame up the conversations and incorporates a poems that was commissioned by the Chief Nurse of England, Professor Jane Cummings. And please do go have a visit on the websites as well if you wish. But here's a special offer. If you come into hospital, especially if you're over the age of 80 and you lie for a week in bed, we will give you 20% off your quads power. You will lose 1.5 kilos of muscle mass and 10% of your aerobic activity. Not only that, if you spend 3 weeks like this, we'll give you a reduction in fitness equal to a full 30 years of aging. This is based on the 1966 Dallas study. And not only that, hospital inactivity is associated with a 48% increase in disability and in the increase in the need for help and activities of daily living up to a month after discharge. Muscle weakness, which is ongoing up to 3 to 5 years after discharge, particularly at cellular level. Of the 6-minute walk test, people only make 2/3 of that, and a 5-fold increase in the need for institutional care upon discharge, and that's after just a week. And not only that, it'll lead to accelerated bone loss, malnutrition, delirium, sensory deprivation, death, incontinence. I've from a number of people. I see Marlene Awad has just put in, you can have Bieber. Yeah, but only if you'll take Bono, Marlene. We love him, he's my favourite band. A geriatrician colleague, a wonderful man. I commend you to Nigel Miller. I think it's Nigel Miller NZ, his Twitter handle. Wonderfully wise man. And, because it seems improbable, but apparently 50% of people over the age of 65 are incontinent within 24 hours of being in hospital. And to my mind, what that ends up leading to is a smaller life. Because people, they get incontinence, and if you think about it for yourself, it's absolutely mortifying. Never anything like this happened before. You start wearing incontinence products. It leads to a smaller life, because then when you go home, you choose not to go out to shops in case you get incontinence. And that's a terrible unintended consequence of all of these things. And this is where the model time comes into the picture. So when you look at it, a bit like, fish not seeing water, time in fact is absolutely everywhere around us. So it is the most important currency. So how do we maximize the time that's available and minimize wasted time? And when you think about it, access targets, your elective activity targets, your cancer targets, your waiting lists, your emergency care, they're all related to time and measured in time. Harm is caused as a consequence of time ill spent. There's great work done by Drew Richardson in Australia, 2006, which found there was a correlation between the length of time in an emergency department and so increase in morbidity and mortality. It just kind of makes sense, really, doesn't it? And the other feature around it is that beds. Just pop in if you will, again, the chat box. If you, in the facilities in which you work, in the hospitals if you work, if you doubled the number of beds that you've got, what do you think would happen in the next 6 months? What do you think would happen to your beds in 6 months if you double the number you've got available to you? What would occur? Lots of people typing. Debbie from NRHC is saying you'd fill them. Wendy, and can I just say thank you, by the way, to Wen and Kendi for enabling and setting all this up. It's hugely appreciated. We share a parole officer. Roberta, they'd fill up and people would wait even longer, be filled in no time, fill them up. And you're absolutely right, increase the length of stay, exactly, because the threshold lowers. And what this brings home is that beds are not capacity. All beds are essentially is furniture where people are waiting for things to happen. And the biggest global crisis we face in healthcare is not a financial one. We have extensively, I teach lean thinking, and I've been running in various places in Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and it has saved many, many millions of dollars of avoidable costs. One place I did some work, they worked out their return on investment of my time, because I work for myself, where that's something like 28,000 to 1. So it is not a financial issue. I note you, Mary Margaret, you're saying that they'll be all occupied, some of it not efficiently. That's exactly right. It's not beds. If we accept that filling them, saying, as you say, Roxanne, they'll be filled with patients the same as they are now, we accept then that beds are not there for capacity. Capacity is clinical decision makers and action takers. It is no way that it is not true that a new graduate, allied health, an RN, a doctor, they do not constitute capacity because they cannot make a decision. It's about decision makers who can move the patient on the next step on their journey. And a note here, Roberta, you've said that you opened, because and I should say, by the way, Roberta's in the Norfolk and Norwich Hospital in the east of England. It opened 20 more beds a fortnight ago and had no positive impact on performance. It really does strip it away. And I must be honest, phoned to a director of nursing in England, and she said, we're going to be open to 2 or 3 more wards, and we're going to put a porticom in the car park or on the roof to add more beds. That is not capacity, and that's a really important bit to understand. DNAs, did not attend for outpatients. I'm not sure what you call them. Do you call them MIAs? They constitute time because you can't carry an empty slot into next week. Even on the day people go home, they're waiting for ward rounds, discharge paperwork, medications, surprise relatives saying, they've only been here for 6 weeks, I wasn't sure they were going home. It comes as a surprise on the day. Looking for equipment, looking for people to call back, being involved in pointless meetings. Wouldn't it be fantastic if you said, right, I'm off to a point-full meeting now, it's the only type I go to. And even 70% of global health budgets, they are spent on staff. That is OPEX, operational expenditure. And the thing is this, we talk about part-time and full-time. The currency of healthcare is time, because we call them salary and wages, but that's what the connecting currency of healthcare is. It is absolutely time. And it's axiomatic to me that in order to value patients' time, we must also value staff time as well. So here's notwithstanding we'll go at a fair old pace, here's a few questions for you to ponder, and perhaps if you wish, make a few comments in the box. What is it about makes it so important? And think Twitter rather than long paragraphs. What was your own experience? What did you notice about time? And you may well find that it's the waiting for things to happen. And all of us within healthcare, we know the system. We get it. Many of us who've got clinical backgrounds will be able to speak Latin. So we know how the system works. And we're sitting there with our loved one, or perhaps even ourselves, thinking, when is something going to happen. And the understanding of time differs. You know, I worked in academic general practice in London for a number of years, and so I kind of got a devolved bias towards medical colleagues. And, because, doctor bashing used to be nursing's favourite blood sport, but I think we've kind of got over that. You know, you look at the women and men who are particularly junior doctors, and they are working and working and working. And they'll spend 5 minutes with a patient, they'll move on to the next patient and the next patient, and their workload, the intensity of their work is very, very full on. And yet the patient will spend 23 hours and 55 minutes waiting for the next patient, for the next time they see a doctor. So the constructs of time are different. And, you know, in an emergency department, most of my clinical career, if we need, urgent means now, right this moment. On a ward, it might mean today. For social services, that might mean this week. So even within healthcare, our constructs of time differ. And in the end, it is patient time that is the most important currency in healthcare. It is also the most expensive currency in healthcare. And it's axiomatic to me that in order to value patient time, we must also value staff time. And Roberta, I know you've made a really great point there, that you have a lot of time to think when you're in hospital, and you measure your days by the meal time spoken written with feeling. And I think that's absolutely right. So if we accept the construct of time as the key currency, looking then towards ownership, how do you get people to own it? Well, this is where NPJ paralysis comes to the party. Because if you ever wonder why I call it ICU now, you know. And you've got the patient, and they feel vulnerable, something wrong with them, there's a disadvantage, they're disempowered, they can't speak up. It's not very nice. Feeling, you know, when we talk about partnerships with patients, I'm not sure that's quite right, because we can never be equal when we hold the power of knowledge, we hold the timing of when people get pain relief, we hold treatment out. There's all kinds of things. It's a disequilibrium, but the patient owns their sickness. I appreciate that it's my bad I didn't explain sufficiently well enough to Ken. In fact, the NPJ paralysis movement was born in the outback of Australia last November. And I was speaking to a nurse unit manager out there in a rehab ward, and she started putting the rehab unit. And Broken Hill is tiny. It's a population of 30,000 people in an area the size of England, 18,000 of whom live in a mining town called Broken Hill. And she was talking about in this rehab unit, getting patients up and dressing, putting them in their shoes and starting. She said the telling moment was when the men said, "Nurse, could we have a barbecue?" She said, "No man is going to ask to have a barbecue if they're in their pajamas." And in response to some colleagues, while I was there, they had sent me a tweet, and I had responded with, "Nursing was born in the church and raised in the army, and we put people in uniform called pajamas. Let's fix that," which within days became NPJ paralysis. Because people come into hospital, they get into their pajamas, and they get paralyzed in their pajamas. That's where they get pajama-induced paralysis, and it's about ending that. And we've known this, so man, this century is a century for geriatricians and older people's health. The last century was about trauma, it was long-term conditions, older people's health. And back in 1947, Richard Asher, who as it happens also coined the term Munchausen's, he wrote about the dangers of going to bed. And as you can see, it talks about the different measures of it, illness, doctor's bedside manner, bed's not ordered like a pill and a purge, we assume it's the treatment. And he went through, you can download this, and one thing I forgot to mention, I have got a Last 1,000 Days Facebook page. So if you look up Last 1,000 Days on Facebook, you please do join us, because a lot of this content, including this paper, a lot of it is downloadable. And he went through the various body systems, like he looked at the alimentary canal, with increased bed rest, there's a reduced peristalsis leading to constipation. You look at skin integrity being compromised, muscle tone weakening, but even mental well-being deteriorating as patients, and Roberta, you've alluded to it, a lot of times people are ruminating, they're reflective, they become lethargic. So we've known this stuff for 70 years now. And ownership is about taking responsibility, stepping up. It's owning a cause, the issue, the problem, but also owning a success. And it's all in the framing. You know, so it's, I think it was Henry Ford, whether you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right. It's about taking a sense of ownership of what you can do. And that's about focusing not on the circle of concern, as Stephen Covey would have written, which is all the stuff about everyone else, if they did their job, I'd be fabulous. It's about the circle of influence, is the things you can control. But what people do is, oh yeah, nobody listens to me, I've got no real voice, I've got no control. And, you know, this image is, if you like, is of a nurse, but it can equally apply to a doctor, to a manager like Roberta, to Allied Health. And it leads to what I call MOPE syndrome. And MOPE syndrome is this. It stands for the most oppressed people ever. There's nobody, and particularly us nurses, we are fantastic martyrs. Oh my God, we're so good. It's like Jesus Jones, when you get off the wood, the bonfire, we can smell the wood. You know, it's something we do particularly well. I'm not happy to say about it as nurses, but it is also true, and we have to step up collectively, all of us, about saying we have a voice, we have control over things, and it is in our gift to ensure others listen. And this is where it's not, leadership to my mind is not a job title. Leadership is absolutely a set of behaviors. And if you look at this picture, you'll see in the top right-hand side in blue, it's Chloe Harris, a young physiotherapist, and I'll be meeting her for the first time on the 16th when there's 150 folk coming to a workshop I'm doing in Reading, in England. And she said, why don't we, this is earlier this year, why don't we all come to work in our pajamas just to make the point? And I love the fact that, you know, you can see there they've got the, you know, the patients front and center. And, you know, this started to spread like wildfire, you know, particularly in the NHS. It's absolutely gone completely viral. You can see everyone's really, really enthused. You see the bottom left-hand picture there. You got these, you know, allied health and nursing colleagues all working. I love how they've got the patient in the front and center. If you look at the bottom right-hand corner, in the second from the right, you'll find that we finally found Wally. He's here. And it's all in the framing. You know, three men, there they are, they're laying bricks. And the first man's asked, what are you up to? He says, oh, all I'm doing is laying these bricks. Second man is doing this exactly same job. And he's asked, what are you doing? He says, what I'm doing is I'm feeding my family. And the third person is asked, what are you doing? He says, well, what I'm doing is I'm part of a team building a school so that our children have somewhere to learn and the next equipped generation are better equipped than us. And who do you think is the person who's going to be the most satisfied, most happy, with the most sense of purpose? It's clearly the third person. And this is where communication comes in, because you cannot over-communicate. You're thinking it, you're talking with your peers, and then wonder why stuff doesn't happen. And, you know, communication itself isn't engagement. Communication is getting out there, being honest and real, just going to talk to people one-to-one. It's finding out what they believe, what they value. And just because people ask a lot of questions doesn't mean they're against it. There's different types of personalities. I run a workshop in my big workshop, but elsewhere as well. I like to call it How to Work with People You Really Want to Kill. And what it's about is the different personalities and how do you communicate with different types of people. And you know, in short, it's be more them than you. To communicate, if they speak bullet points, do bullet points. But it's about taking time to find out what it is that people are seeking, what they understand, listening to their questions, not assuming they're against it, but they're seeking to process it. And in healthcare, we are small c conservative, and that's not a bad thing because we want to get it right. And the ownership then he's stopped doing them now. I think his boss has decided he was spending most of his life on it. And his name is Courtney Baines. He's a fabulous comms manager in Cambridge University Hospital in England. And he's got things for Lego bricks. He's created these images on his desk. And you can see, and he very generously started to put, with his acknowledgement, the organizations that were using these posters. He put their logo on it. And this was done, 133 organizations benefited from Courtney's great work, and I've seen them in Murrumbidgee in New South Wales, in the far west in Broken Hill, in the outback, across New Zealand, well over the UK, and I think I believe in Canada as well. It's about him bringing home the message, using things like red to green, which is red day is a day where stuff should have happened, it didn't happen for the patient. Green day is when it does, and it's as few red days as green day as we can have green days, and this is put on a screensaver. And if you need a good reason, you need a good story, because the universe, as somebody once said, it's not made of atoms, it's made of stories. Here's 4. Patient time's most important currency. 10 days in hospital leads to 10 years of muscle aging in people over 80. 46% of people over 85 will then die within a year of hospital admission. This is work on in Scotland of 25,000 patients. And if this was your last days, 1,000 days, how many would you choose to spend? Time, ownership, diagnostics. And the diagnostics, what does good care look like? What does good look like, and measuring that. And there's a great Palestinian proverb even, which is, you can't fatten a cow by weighing it. Yes, improvement isn't only about measurement. But you can't improve it. Most people join a gym in January, and the reason is they say, I'm going to lose weight and I'm going to get fit. Right, well, I've lost 200 grams, therefore I'm lighter, and now I can walk 2 steps, not 1. It's kind of, some isn't a number, soon isn't a time, as the great Don Berwick of the IHI once said. It's about making sure we've got metrics built in. And this is a lovely one from the Royal Free, teaching there on the 11th of August in London. And their goal, their improvement aim is get patients in 10 North, up out of bed, dressed in their own clothes, and they had built in, as you can see, and we won't dwell on this, they had the aim, a clear aim. They had primary drivers, they had secondary drivers, so they had a really good, and in fact they've shot well past the aim that they had, which was great. But they also had three measures which are really important. First of all, your outcome measures, then your process measures, how long is the patient out of bed. But for every metric you put, it's really important to have a balancing metric. Because if your length of stay goes up, if you get people up, dressed and moving, and there's increased falls, if there's an unintended consequence of a measure, it's almost like Newton's, third law, is ensuring that you don't unintentionally have a negative outcome on the patient. So balancing measures are as important in many ways as the measures and the outcomes themselves. And here's a picture of a whole bunch of them in hospital gowns and onesies. Yes, they have reached northwest London or North London, the posh bit as well. So, and what's really lovely, you can see in the top, in the pink third row up, that is the charge nurse there. And it was led, in fact, by the woman on her right, who's an occupational therapist. Wonderful people. But what's also very important is capturing the patient's voice as well in all of this work, not superimposing what we feel is right, but asking the patients what they think works best for them as well. And if you look at a patient's journey, they go through the system, they get a lot of care when they first arrive, and there's a lot of weight, and then they get some broken sleep, and then less care, and more weight, broken sleep, more. And essentially, deconditioning is a combination of waiting and sleep deprivation. If we could reduce the length of time overall without changing the amount of clinical care, if anything, what we would do is increase the percentage of the care that people receive. And every patient, and every relative, and every care, and to my mind also every nurse, doctor, allied health professional should know the answer to these 4 questions. What's wrong with me? What's happening to me today? When am I going home? And what do I need? What needs to happen to me to get home? You can't measure a baseline, for example, in hospital. And doing a quick and dirty audit in your units and asking those 4 questions, but then equally asking all of the staff, and what that will open up, in a way that's the secret sauce, the second bit, is the communication gradients between the different clinicians to find out who knows what and why. And that's how you can start to identify what are the wasted times that are created. So, how do you know, what's a good experience look like to you? How do you know you're doing a good job? And to get into the chat box, how will you measure success if it comes to knowing what good patient experience or staff experience looks like? Feel free to fire stuff into the chat box, if you will. I'll just grab my cup of tea. It's 7:34, by the way, tomorrow, Wednesday the 4th over here. So if anyone needs the lottery for Saturday, just let me know, and I'll, since we're about, 15, 16 hours ahead of you, very happy to do so. And it's 7:34 in the UK. So, measures, asking, Wendy said, just ask the patients, RGP, that'll be Ken. More people going home, lots of people answering here. Success is measured by reducing length of stay. And you raise a really interesting point here, Angela, because there is a danger with measuring average length of stay, because what you end up in is the floor of averages. So if your average length of stay, for the sake of argument, is 10 days, and you have 50% of your day patients with a 2-day length of stay, but you've got a number of patients, not many, a number of patients who have got a 100 length of stay, it pulls it back to the mean, and you end up with a 10-day length of stay. So we need to be looking at 10th, 25th, 90th percentiles. And if you've got a lot of patients, a high percentage of patients who are out in under 24 hours, then one of the features you have to ask is, did those patients need to come in at all? So being mindful of measuring length of stay is getting into the weeds with the detail of those. Lots of great comments in here as well around leaving the hospital without a reduction in strength. Really powerful. Doctors more likely to discharge if the patient looks well with their clothes on. Absolutely, and I'll show you an image of that. Reduce staff turnover and staff morale. People join organizations, they leave managers. It's a crucial role of leaders is to support the staff. And for the first time ever in human history, we have 4 generations. We've got the back end of the boomers, the XYs and the Zs are penetrating now. The rate of knots, they're about 20 now, the oldest of them. And the paradigms, as we know from medicine, is getting tougher because a lot of junior doctors are saying, well, I'm not going to do a 100-hour week. Why would I? I've got a life. I choose to have one. So there's lots of comments, and here's some thoughts as well. If you various measures of what success would look like, and it picks up the point I was made earlier, asking the patients, but also asking the staff, a more timely discharge, reducing length of stay, timely admission, so that people aren't waiting, languishing in emergency department corridors. Many people leave hospital undernourished or malnourished rather. And that's because if you're lying in bed, actually you don't really feel hungry. But if you're getting up and moving and going, particularly people with surgical procedures, where you need a higher protein load for wound care, that can only help. And then UTI, DVT, URT, upper respiratory tract infections and so on. And again, the point about fewer patients depressed, having a place where some people can go. And there's a point that Kay has made about the no congregate dining. But I've seen this in a number of places. What they're doing is they're bringing in those little, fold-away tables. You can buy them in. I'm not sure what your equivalent would be of Bunnings or B&Q, but it would be, these hardware stores. And again, fold-away tables, and they're putting them into the middle of the 6-bedded bays, if that's what you have. And people are starting to have their meals around the table because loneliness particularly for older people, is a significant problem, as we know. Actions are about identifying the ways of prioritizing time and engaging other people in change, and focus on all kinds of things like videos. They've developed posters, and it picks up the point that was made earlier about people seeing with somewhere where what I'm trying to say. Roberta's point about the doctors are more likely to discharge if the patient looks well with their clothes on. This picture by Peter Kennel in Northampton is really, to my mind, it speaks to cognitive bias. If you're sick, you're lying in bed, you're in pajamas, people think, oh, you're not very well. But if you have somebody up and dressed and in the chair, there'll be, the clinical team is like, oh, my goodness, you're looking pretty good, actually. That's would you want to go home today because you do look a lot better? How do you feel? The relatives, they come in and say, oh, ma'am, you're looking fantastic. Gosh, you look terrible yesterday. Look at you now, you're great. And what do we do? What's the patient going to think? Actually, I feel good. Thanks very much. I'm all good. A good colleague and friend of mine, she talks about, no woman wants to be, lying in bed and meeting her friends and relatives without even wearing their lippy or a bra. And we've all been there, we've all had our daggy days, the getting in pyjamas and you're not feeling very well, feel sorry for yourself, and somebody rings you and says, I'm going to be around in half an hour. What's the first thing you do? Right, you leave it the shower, and you get yourself dressed and sort of, they think, actually, I'm glad I did now. I feel a bit better for that. And that would be so true for patients as well. Blogs and case studies have been written. And that's the other thing I will say to you is via, following this, there'll be a link that Ken will send out. But I will also be sending, it's an evolving document, PDF of a couple of pages now, of links, films. We weren't, because of bandwidth, we couldn't put up a film that's called Your Last 1,000 Days. There's another one called The Last 1,000 Days, and so I'm going to send to you all links to all of this content, blogs, stories, newspaper stories, and so on, including the Facebook page link, and a link to a Dropbox so you can get materials. And what I would also ask you to do is, if you email me as I'm writing content, I will start to send out material to you, and certainly would welcome you to doing that. Social media, I must be honest, I don't remember saying about if you had 1,000 days left to live, but it's taken off itself as a term. The beautiful Sonia Sparkles, who's a transformation manager, has a real passion for drawing, and that's her website. I urge you to look at it. She does some beautiful stuff, including her character is called Sparkles, and it's things like, if Sparkles wrote policies, will they be short, they'll be accessible, they'll be useful, and some wonderful stuff. I can only encourage you to do that. Leaflets that have been developed for patients, and a beautiful one that, in fact, again, the Royal Free have done, is about valuing patient time, which has come out today. If you look at the hashtag on Twitter, you'll find, I think it's knocking up on about 120 million impressions now since January. You'll see a load of content. So when you want to create ownership and for action and engage people, give the followers credit. Great leaders will take less credit than they deserve. They'll also take more blame than they deserve as well, because they will stand in front of the bullets. When you look at perfection, perfect is the enemy of better. It's how do we embrace reality. And everybody's job, no matter what you are, really, you're a director of permission giving. It's supporting people to do the right thing. And here's an example of a junior ward manager in Cork. It was in March, and Aileen Horgan, she had got patients, worked in a rehab ward, that was her ward, and she had two patients, both with dementia. They both got them up and dressed and moving. They ended up PJ paralysis, and these patients with dementia were waiting to go to care home because their physical and cognitive function improved to the point that instead of going to a care home, they went back to their home. And can you imagine what it would be like across Canada, across the UK or everywhere, if we could enable more people, instead of waiting to care homes, they could go back to where they belong, to their loved ones. A ward clerk putting up a funky design in Bolton. They started making badges in the NHS. A good colleague of ours, a fabulous one, a man called Pete Gordon, started doing these, and he practically became Postman Pat, or Postman Pete even, because they became so popular. I think they were going, on the black market at about a half a kidney each. If you're going to do something, if you're going to start something, you might as well go in boots and all. This is in Wagga Wagga, in the wonderfully named Wagga Wagga in Australia. And in the middle is the Executive Director of Nursing, Regional Director. On the right is Beck, so Karen and Beck in the blue, who's a regional educator. By the way, that's not my teddy bear, it's Karen's, I'd like to point out, but that is my wee Willy Winky nightgown, and rather funky, if I say so myself, Winkle Pickers in red. So you've got to do these things. And, if we want to make people to take action, actually, it's not the transactional, here's the target, go hit it. It's connecting with people's values. It's about making the sense-making that's important. Connecting people emotionally, because if people believe what you believe, they will follow you. And I can only urge you to look at Simon Sinek's, S-I-N-E-K, his TED Talk and his wonderful books. Here's an instance of making stuff visible about actions. This is in Murrumbidgee in the south of Brisbane. And you can see here you've got day one. This will get you out of bed. You have to let the nurse know if you feel sick or in pain. You have an X-ray, or you have your hip strain, or take a blood sample. Look, you've got a skeleton and a vampire bat. But you look at most of these have got images and icons, which for people with language or literacy issues, it makes it easier. But what's fascinating here is if you look at the second column down, bottom of day 2. On day 3, the patients will be saying, because they would get these and their relatives, nurse, I didn't get my catheter taken out yesterday. Could you see if you could get that done today? It shortened length of stay because of visibility about length of stay and what that meant and the daily goals that people had. They owned it. And this is a pledge, and these I'm happy to share these templates, which is created by Jennifer Helen, an OT, in the Countess of Chester up in the northwest of England. And you can see people were writing pledges from pajamas style, and people committing to what they would do to value the patient's life, to end PJ paralysis. And the last bit is about you. You know, what is your why? What is your clarity? If you've got clarity of purpose, clarity of plan, clarity of responsibility, knowing what you will not stand for and choosing the battles you pick, that's around building your self-awareness and management. Because let's be honest, every one of us now and again thinks we've got one of these going to go off in our heads. And, you know, if you put your two fists together and you'll see actually, you know, side by side, you can't actually see this, of course, your fists together is about the size of the brain inside your head. But leadership style, which comes from the head and the heart, it's really, really important. 70% of team performance is a reflection of the leader. And as a nurse and a medical colleague, allied health colleagues will recognize this. You go from one ward to another, and you just go 20 meters, and you're just like going to a whole other country. And healthcare is one health system, and it's 1,000 different villages, and it's down to particularly the nurse manager. So if you look at to engage people, see it from their perspective. It's not point like going on holidays and shouting louder in French so that they'll hope that they'll understand you. In America, no, let's just leave that one there. It's seeing them from their perspective, saying yes to their worldview. And none of us have a patent on reality. I had a conversation the other night with a 30-something master's educated individual who who thinks evolution is simply a theory, doesn't believe in climate change, and thinks that the President of the United States is amazing. Well, you know, listen carefully and ask lots of questions, suspend your own needs. And the trick, I think, in those cases when we're fundamentally in disagreement, find the things that you most have in common. In my case with that individual, we both share a passion for music and bands, and we're writing lists of things. There's always a way through. And it's also why I'd recommend the great work of Brene Brown, B-R-E-N-E-E, Brown, who's a shame researcher from Houston, brand new book called Braving the Wilderness, and amazing TED Talks. I can only commend her to you. But the fact is we all communicate. We've all worked for people the minute they walk in the door, you know, the booth they're in. You can see yourselves. I mean, that's just download from Google. You see, if I ask you, and I'm acutely aware, what, just quickly, if you will, what do you think mood that person is in, the one that's in the image? What attitude is that individual purveying, do you think? What sort of mood is he in? You pop it in your chat box. So several people already typing. Sandra Nichols is typing. Marlene. Multiple attempts at typing. And it's all going to come flooding in any second now. The kind of comments. Let us just scroll it down, in fact. Here we go. Closed communication. Hostiles. Mind is made up. You can't make me. Resistance. It's futile. Whatever you say, it won't work. Unapproachable. So, pissed off. I'm not sure what that word means. I mean, I'm Irish, you know. We don't use that kind of language. It's the only language we use. And what else? No way. Whatever you say, you know. So loads of... And actually, right, you know, we can see here. Yes, but straight away it gives an image. Now, if you look closely at the poster, it could be, if you look closely, you might think he might be grumpy because his trousers are split. I mean, you know, I don't know how you spotted that. But maybe that's why he's grumpy. But the simple truth is we are communicating all the time. And when you're distracted and you walk past somebody, you're not thinking, but they thinking, they notice. And in a leadership role, you're never off duty for a heartbeat. How you connect with the person in the coffee shop. Somebody sees you. Modeling is crucial. So meeting people where they are, building on commonality, goes back to my earlier comment about this engaged conversation. And we're going to meet for coffee, you know. We will always disagree, but we will be respectful and supportive in finding the mutual wins. So where to kind of go from here? Well, we've got 3 bits to share with you. The first is this, is fit to sit. Is about ED and ambulance staff being encouraged to pit patients in the chairs rather than on trolleys, preferably in their own clothes as well, by the way. Because what that's about is enabling people to be able to sit up in bed rest, because it's also about reducing, you know, if you're 4 or 5 hours in an emergency department, you can lose 1 to 2% of muscle mass, particularly in the quadriceps. And we've just started, and Roberta has been one of those involved in the leadership of this. It's around 20 organisations across the east of England, Cambridge, Norfolk and Norwich, Kings Lynn, Ipswich, places like that. And what we've got going between the start and the 22nd of December is 100,000 days, patient days of people up, dressed and moving. And the plan behind it is you can see here, you've got all these, and this is some of Sonia Sparkle's work, by the way. Do follow her on Twitter too, if you will. The reasons why, because having a good why is important. It's not the what and the how, it's the why that engages people. And so what we have is, you can see there's a very cunning spreadsheets being done so people can capture it. It's going to the NHS improvement team. They're producing some really quality data, but at local ward level you can see how many days, how many patient days for people up, dressed and moving. Here's an image from one of the hospitals, and they've got the pictures up, and this is how they did last week, in fact, where you've got, about 100 plus patients who've been up and dressed and moving on their ward. And so what we have is this going on. Spring 2018, my goal is we will have a 100-day campaign across the NHS for 1 million patient days, and then why not? And here's the challenge for you. Would you like to participate in a global 10 million patient day challenge? And if you do, yes please, I would love to, we would love to have you participate. Do email me because we'll build this up. I see, by the way, Roberta, thank you very much. You have your PJs ready for next Tuesday, and the CEO has his teddy and his testing ground, and the therapists are collecting the data. So you engage your therapists, your nurses, your hospital aides. They will be collecting this data. So thank you for that, Roberta. It's really helpful. And it's great to see the CEOs getting to the party, which is interesting. So many CEOs are. And on a quick aside, what's fascinating, people are saying, I felt embarrassed, I felt uncomfortable, I felt vulnerable, and people walked past me, and I'm the ward manager, or I'm the doctor. It's made me feel invisible. And when people own an emotion, they will commit, because they think, actually, that's what it's like for patients, because that's what it felt like for me. We've got to do the right thing. Virtual choir, on the right-hand side, you can see Deirdre Fowler from Shrewsbury, and she's the Director of Nursing. In the middle is the CEO with pyjama trousers, which I'm sure you really ought to have a volume control. They're so loud. And she put up Wake Up Happy, and so that sounds like it could be a great anthem for end PJ paralysis. And over a couple of days, people were piling in with their own ideas for songs. And then Michelle Smith, who comes in the middle of the niece, she created a Spotify list, which if you want me to, I'll create. You can just, what you do, so I can't do this, you'll have to do it in Canada, is you can just put in those things and then make it on the Canadian Spotify, so you get your very own Spotify list. Two people put in lines of Bohemian Rhapsody, so over about a 20-minute period, I rewrote the words of Bohemian Rhapsody. As you do, is this the real life, or PJ fantasy, caught on a pat slide, no escape from reality? Pajamas, just killed a man, put some PJs on his bed, made him wear that, stay there now, he's dead. Oh, I had to rewrite those, by the way. Unfortunately, we were going to create a virtual choir, but unfortunately we can't get permission from Queen to change the words. But there is another plan coming up which will emerge in March, as you will see, which it does include the NHS choir and choirs like Roberta's as well. So all of this, as we draw us towards a closure, is about creating social millionaires. And to my mind, every single day across the globe, we undertake 1 million acts of kindness about valuing time, having no needless waste of time in red days, offering dignity, humanity, reminding us why we came in the first place, because we're part of something bigger than ourselves. And we may not get financially rich, but we get rich in different kinds of ways. We are social millionaires, making an impact on our societies. And this is why the last 1,000 days matters. I was working with a group of older people's physicians, nurses, therapists, and managers some years ago, 8 or 9 years ago, here in Christchurch in New Zealand. And we were talking about lean and waste. And into my head pops this fully formed construct of the last 1,000 days. And what it goes is like this. If you are a woman, you can expect to live to the age of 83. And if you're a man, you can expect to live to the age of 79. But if you're an 80-year-old woman or a 76-year-old man, what you have left is 1,000 days. Now, I know that the longer we live, you survive to the age of 10, you survive to childhood, life expectancy goes up. The longer we live, longer life expectancy tends to be. There's good evidence to show us that those who've got the most birthdays live longest. I'm sure that alone got me a professorship. But actually, if you look at 2/3 of people who go into acute hospitals, they're over the age of 65. If you're over 85 and you're admitted 46% will die within 12 months. Many people we take care of are in their last 1,000 days. And that is why, in the end, NPJ paralysis is the operationalization of valuing patient time, especially those in the last 1,000 days. And the fact is this, none of us know when that will begin. I lost my best friend on the 26th of February. And when we were growing up, we had acres of life ahead of us. None of us were to know that Mark would be gone from us in our mid-50s. And that's also why valuing time is so important. Treating every day as something precious is so important as well. It's around how do we take care of those around us and those we love, and also how do we ensure that time is valued, because one day, please God, all of us will be that 76-year-old man, that 80-year-old woman, and we'll look back in our lives, and there's a lovely line in John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, where he talks about far away in the future, the 1,000 lives we could have led are waiting for us to show up. But once we get there, it's only going to be one of them. Because every one of us on this call could have chosen different lives, which life would have been easier. We wouldn't have had to work as hard. We wouldn't be away from families or from family events. We wouldn't have been studying, all of the time, always thinking about what we do. We could have made it. We could have earned more, I'm sure. We could have done different things. And instead, we chose a life collectively of purpose, of being part of something bigger than ourselves. And I think, please God, if all of us on this call, we are looking back in our last 1,000 days, we may say, I may not have got rich and I may not have got famous, but it mattered. I mattered to my community, I mattered to my family, I mattered to my profession, I mattered to my country, because I made it a little bit better than when I arrived. And that, I think, to my mind, is a life of service and a life that mattered. Because as I draw this talk to an end, I'm minded of perhaps the greatest Kiwi of all, because it's not they that stop us doing stuff. It really isn't. Often leadership starts from within, with us. And as the great Sir Edmund Hillary once said, it's not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves. So thank you so much for your time. And Ken, I'll pass it over and back to you, and do feel free to make any comments in the chat box.
Thank you, Brian, so much for that discussion. There was many, countless very, very thoughtful messages to help us mobilize mobility. And I don't know if you had a subliminal effect on Wendy and I here in the office, but we took 3 stretch breaks over the course of this webinar, so we did not stay seated for the duration of the past hour. I can't help but think that there are many potentially useful messages for our own early mobilization strategies here that we are implementing in Ontario and in other parts of Canada, particularly through Move On. I'm wondering if some of the audience might want to share any ideas they learned from today's discussion, perhaps share some of the messaging that they've used in their implementations that they felt were really helpful and resonated to get people pumped up and up and at 'em. I mean, I myself look forward to coming to work tomorrow in my flannel onesie.
And do please take a photograph and put it on our Facebook page. Because we want to celebrate and share all the stuff. Because, we need, at the IHI, I commend to you, IHI.org, they've got a wonderful thing. And they've got a thing on the joy, in creating joy at work. And we shouldn't be afraid of that. Was there staffing increasing to accommodate dressing patients, Angela asked? No, there hasn't been, and I have to say the NHS is doing it particularly tough. Counterintuitively, it reduces work, because instead of, especially nurses, running around trying to keep up and sorting out bottles and one thing, patients, the small bit of investment in helping people get dressed and an additional bit of time is more than compensated by the fact that people are they're more able to be independent. They can take themselves to the toilet, and using relatives and volunteers to help mobilize patients. Absolutely, Roberta, which is good. And people, rallies, they want to help. People want to help. They don't always know how, especially when somebody's in bed. So, what does good care, and also the call to action to be to motivate. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Susan, for that. So many patients just stay in bed at home. They need something to do in the daytime, during the day instead. And loneliness genuinely is a killer. And there's a beautiful piece I went up a day or two ago on the Facebook page of a young man in his 20s, early 30s, who's basically no phone, no iPhone, no nothing, no TV, no internet for about a week, and he is just starting to go stir crazy. And then he goes next door to his neighbour who he didn't know, and many older people, and you will know this, will spend up to a whole week without seeing a single individual. The loneliness is a big killer. It's even more of a killer than alcohol, obesity, smoking, apparently. And there's some work from 2015 that indicates that. Susan's comment about liking the simple idea. And any other comments on questions, picking up Ken's points as well?
Yeah, we're rounding the hour, but we can hang out for maybe a couple more minutes if there's some last thoughts or questions for us to entertain. So very, very lucky for us to have Brian Dolan willing to present this webinar, and for him to have gotten up in the wee hours. It's still probably the sun has just risen in New Zealand, and have this just on a cup of tea.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Yes, on my second cup of tea. And tomorrow looks lovely, by the way, the weather, in case you're wondering.
And we're getting some compliments from our guests. If there are some questions, we will stick around for a couple more minutes and answer it. If not, I want to thank you, our guests, for tuning in. We always enjoy having discussion with you, and we hope you will leave this webinar refreshed and hopefully with some ideas to get your patients moving. And
can I just say thank you all so very much for your grace and courtesy and your interactions. It's really, and please, Canada's the one country I so want to go to. I've never been. I may be in Calgary in beginning of April of next year. But yes, thank you Rhonda, for that kind words, and everybody else. It's very, very generous. And as Wendy, just so you all hear, it's being recorded and will be available to you after this webinar, coming to a good shops near you.
Yes, so there will be links. Brian mentioned a few resources he's willing to share. As well, we have a recording, as Wendy mentioned, and the slide deck will be made available, and it will be in your inboxes very shortly. So there's the last few comments floating in. If you need to be on to another meeting, we thank you again for joining us.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Kay.
Just read.
All for tuning in. I think with that we'll sign out, but thank you all for your attention. Thank you, Brian, for making the time to share these messages with us.
Thank you, and thank you all so much, and so many of you coming on as well. It's just been brilliant to chat with you, and thank you for allowing me to offer this inarticulate speech of the heart about something I feel so intensely passionate that we can individually make this a difference. And whether you're a student nurse or a really senior doctor or nurse or health help or a manager, we can each make a small difference to somebody. So thank you so much again. Take care. God bless.
Great. Thanks, everyone. The RGP signing off as well.